This movie is based on Changchun Garden, one of the 3 most haunted houses in South Korea. Its horror level far surpasses Gonjeom, Haunted Asylum. Quickly tag your friends who love horror and watch it together. The terror begins right from the start. A woman is suddenly woken up by a strange noise while sleeping. Calling out to her husband, she reaches out beside the bed but finds nothing. Instinctively, she removes her sleep mask, only to be met with a horrifying sight. The next second, she discovers her husband hanging from the ceiling beam, his eyes bleeding profusely as if they had been cruelly gouged out. Devastated, the woman, Xiaomei, is in complete disbelief. Just yesterday, her husband was perfectly fine, how could he be gone so suddenly? Though she refuses to accept reality, she has no choice but to arrange his funeral. She suspects there must be another reason behind his death. However, the police inform her that the autopsy confirms suicide, with no signs of foul play. Xiaomei refuses to believe this. If it was suicide, how could her husband's eyes be bleeding so much? There must be a deeper, hidden secret. Just as she prepares to investigate further, a fierce argument erupts at the funeral between her family and her husband's relatives. The latter accuse Xiaomei's sister of seducing her husband, destroying their family, and causing his suicide. Even Xiaomei's mother-in-law believes Xiaomei's entire family is to blame. The scene turns chaotic as the 2 families hurl insults at each other. When Xiaomei tries to intervene, she is pushed to the ground. As the conflict escalates, she struggles to stand up and screams at them to stop. The crowd finally quiets down, only to witness something even more terrifying. A deep red stain begins seeping from Xiaomei's lower body. Horrified, she realizes she has just lost her unborn child. Overwhelmed by grief, she faints on the spot. Though she eventually regains consciousness, the light in her eyes is forever dimmed. The only place that brings her a sense of comfort is the villa her husband had renovated for her before his death. Gathering her belongings, she moves in. Upon arrival, she is enchanted by the sight before her, the swing under the sunlight, the lush flowers in the yard, and the spacious play area for a child. If only her husband were still alive, if only she hadn't lost her baby, they could have lived happily here for the rest of their lives. What she doesn't know is that this place is haunted. Years ago, 4 thrill-seeking young men came to Changchun Garden to test their courage. They wanted to see if the haunted rumors were true, and maybe even find some valuables to take home. Their reckless curiosity would soon lead to unimaginable horror. 3 of them entered the house to explore, while the 4th, Curly, stayed outside to keep watch. Feeling bored, Curly took out his phone for a selfie. But when he checked the photo, he noticed something disturbing, a pale-faced little girl standing in the forest behind him. Confused, he turned around but saw nothing except a cold gust of wind. When he looked back at the photo, the girl had vanished. Meanwhile, inside the house, the others experienced their own terrifying encounters. Xiaobai, one of the young men, heard strange noises coming from the wardrobe. His heart pounded as he slowly opened it, only to find it empty. Thinking he imagined it, he brushed it off. But the next moment, a noise came from outside the window. Looking down, he saw Curly manically swinging on the swing set below. But when he glanced at the forest, he saw the same eerie little girl staring at him with a sinister expression. Terrified, Xiaobai froze in fear. His friends laughed at his reaction, but he knew what he saw. For a moment, his body felt completely paralyzed. When he finally snapped out of it, the girl in the forest had disappeared. Just then, another friend, Guogai, called them from the basement. He had found something disturbing. The group gathered to examine old, eerie photographs. But as they counted the people in the pictures, they were horrified. There were only 3 of them in the room, yet the reflection in the glass showed a 4th shadowy figure standing silently beside them. Was it Curly? If he had entered the basement, he would have announced himself. Why was he just standing there in the corner? Guogai called out his name, but there was no response. He hesitantly approached the figure, only to be met with an unspeakable horror. That night, all 4 of them paid the ultimate price for their reckless curiosity. After moving into the villa, Xiaomei starts experiencing strange occurrences. One night, she is awakened by an eerie noise. The bedroom door creaks open on its own. Cautiously, she walks over to close it, but just as she reaches for the handle, her phone rings. Startled, she answers it. At this moment, she remains unaware of the true horror lurking in the house. Soon after, her sister and nephew move in as well. While exploring the house, Xiaomei notices a dark figure flicker across the staircase. She hesitantly checks the area, only to find nothing there. Convinced she imagined it, she shrugs it off, unaware that a fresh bloodstain has mysteriously appeared beneath the bed. To celebrate their move, Xiaomei decides to cook a meal for her sister. But when she cracks open the 4th egg, something horrifying falls out, a partially developed embryo. Disgusted and horrified, she calls her sister to the kitchen. But when her sister arrives, everything appears normal again. That night, as Xiaomei brushes her teeth, a bloody handprint suddenly appears on her arm. Confused, she tries to touch it, only to feel a searing pain. Brushing off the incident, she returns to her computer to work. Suddenly, the screen turns black. No matter what she does, it won't turn back on. Just as she grows frustrated, the screen flickers back to life, displaying a rapidly growing fetus. Terrified, she snaps out of what she realizes was a nightmare. She tries to convince herself that life will return to normal. But one day, as she and her sister prepare to leave the house, she sees something horrifying, her supposedly dead husband standing motionless on the balcony, staring directly at her. Panicking, she rushes back inside and finds him in the hallway. But no matter how many times she calls out to him, he does not move, does not respond, not even a twitch of his toes. Suddenly, something knocks her down. She blacks out. When she regains consciousness, she is at a doctor's office. The doctor tells her that stress is causing her hallucinations and advises her to eat well and sleep more. Xiaomei tries to follow the advice. But when she returns home late at night, she sees her husband once again, sitting lifelessly in the living room, his eyes empty and devoid of life. Tears well up in her eyes as she desperately asks what is happening. At that moment, a small insect crawls up her arm and burrows into her eye. She screams in agony, clutching her face. As her vision blurs, her husband slowly raises his hand.
Before continuing with the next part of the story, don't forget to subscribe to stay updated and never miss out.
Xiaomei's arm began to stiffen, her body twisted 180 degrees, and her head hung upside down in midair as if it would explode at any moment. She was already in unbearable pain, and countless pitch-black insects crawled into every corner of her body. Once again, Xiaomei was trapped in a nightmare, but the fear of being consumed by insects and the agony of her distorted body left an indelible shadow in her heart. Just then, a strange noise echoed from the floor above. Following the sound, Xiaomei crawled over and peered through a gap in the floorboards, only to see a pregnancy test inexplicably lying there. This puzzled her. There were 3 women in the house, but who would be using such a thing? Before she could make sense of it, the portrait in front of her suddenly cracked open, revealing a photograph of a girl. Xiaomei suspected the girl had a connection to the house, so she began investigating her identity. Slowly, the terrifying truth hidden behind this house started to emerge. After some digging, Xiaomei arrived at a filthy, run-down neighborhood, where she found Xiaobai, the only survivor among a group of 4 who had trespassed into a haunted house. It was through Xiaobai that Xiaomei finally learned the truth. The girl in the photo was named Junju, who had mysteriously disappeared 2.5 years ago. Before her disappearance, she had been close to Xiaobai and the others, but they were never truly friends. The moment they met her, Wanmao was captivated by Junju's beauty, and the others harbored dark intentions as well. During a meal, they pressured Junju into drinking, and being kind and naive, she didn't know how to refuse. She kept drinking, cup after cup, until she was completely intoxicated. That night, an innocent flower was tainted by boundless sin. The so-called friends put on masks, recorded everything on their phones, and showed no remorse afterward. Instead, they used the footage to blackmail Junju, forcing her to entertain men. Any resistance was met with brutal beatings. Upon learning the full truth, Xiaomei was furious. She stormed into the room, ready to teach the wicked woman a lesson on behalf of Junju. But the moment she saw Xiaobai, she was shocked. Xiaobai looked lifeless, emitting a foul stench, and her right foot was tightly shackled by an iron chain. Xiaomei couldn't understand how a once normal woman had become so wretched, until she noticed a photo of Junju with an old man. Only then did she realize that Xiaobai's current state was the result of the old man's revenge. But if the truth had come to light, why had Junju never been found after all this time? Was there another secret lurking beneath the surface? While Xiaomei was still puzzling over this, her sister at home experienced another terrifying event. When Xiaomei returned, she was horrified to find a fierce wind howling inside the house. Rushing to the room, she discovered the interior in ruins, and her sister desperately clutching the doorknob. In Xiaomei's absence, her niece had been completely possessed by an evil spirit and was trapped in the basement. At first, Xiaomei thought it was just another nightmare, but she soon realized that everything, from the pregnancy test appearing out of nowhere to the series of eerie events, was caused by the vengeful spirit haunting the house. Without hesitation, Xiaomei joined her sister, trying to pull the door open and rescue her niece. However, as the sinister wind grew stronger, the furniture in the room started shaking violently, seemingly manipulated by an invisible force. Objects flew at them relentlessly. A heavy blow struck Xiaomei's sister, leaving her head bloodied and knocking her unconscious. Xiaomei was left standing there, terrified. Suddenly, darkness consumed the room, and the basement door creaked open. A chilling, sorrowful cry echoed from within. Xiaomei cautiously stepped inside, only to find her niece crouching motionless in the shadows. Blood dripped from the ceiling. Just as Xiaomei's anxiety peaked, the girl suddenly turned around, her face twisted with rage, and locked eyes with Xiaomei. With just one look, Xiaomei was paralyzed, her body flung violently to the ground by an unseen force. She couldn't comprehend who this vengeful spirit was or why it had targeted her family. Only when a drop of blood from the ceiling fell into her eye did she finally understand. The evil spirit possessing her niece was none other than Junju. Years ago, though she had escaped from her tormentors, she was haunted by nightmares of their cruelty. Unable to move on, she decided to end her life beneath a tree. However, she was rescued just in time, by Xiaomei's husband. At the time, Xiaomei's husband was designing the Changchun Garden and, unbeknownst to his wife, had secretly sheltered Junju there. Day by day, they grew closer. Junju was grateful to him for saving her, and her beauty awakened his desires. He convinced himself that no one would ever know. Soon, Junju became pregnant, but instead of taking responsibility, Xiaomei's husband abandoned her. He had a family and a wife, he couldn't risk everything for a woman he had picked up. What he didn't expect was that Junju would react so extremely. In a desperate attempt to prove her love, she grabbed a knife and began cutting into her own belly, trying to show him the child inside. No matter how much he pleaded, she refused to stop. In the struggle, she was accidentally pushed off the second floor. The knife plunged deep into her stomach. Panicked, Xiaomei's husband called for an ambulance, hoping to save her. But for Junju, abandoned and betrayed, there was no hope left. In her final act of despair, she threw herself into a construction pit filled with wet cement, allowing it to swallow her whole. From that day on, her soul transformed into a powerful vengeful spirit, forever haunting the Changchun Garden. She first took revenge on those who had wronged her, then turned to the man who had abandoned her. Now, possessing Xiaomei's niece, she was about to exact her final vengeance. With a twisted expression, she plunged a knife deep into Xiaomei's sister's stomach. She wanted Xiaomei to experience despair and agony to the very core of her being. But when Xiaomei looked into Junju's furious eyes, she saw not just hatred, but also an overwhelming sense of helplessness. She understood. Junju had been betrayed, used, discarded, and buried beneath the mud. Even in death, she had been denied peace. With that realization, Xiaomei made a decision. She would sacrifice herself to free her sister and niece. And so, she remained in Changchun Garden forever, bound to Junju's fate. That's all for today's story. I'm Movie Recaps Locke. See you next time.
Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell at the end of the video so you won't miss any other exciting stories.